because half the speech was already said on Thursday. Okay. The inequality in Singapore has gone to a really bad stage in Singapore, that it is going to break our country apart very soon. And I think this is something that many Singaporeans acknowledge. In the first 20 years of the PAP's governance, for the first 20 years until 1980, income inequality actually went down in Singapore. But since then, income inequality has been creeping up. In fact, if you look at the 2008 report, the Labour report, the 2010 and the 2013 report, when the PAP reported, they actually pushed down the income inequality over the years downwards. So what they were trying to tell Singaporeans is, income inequality in our reports is actually going down, even though we know it's not going down. In fact, it's going up. But why did the PAP put in the reports that income inequality is going down? What were they trying to tell us? What were they trying to pretend to us? Now on Thursday, during May Day, the Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong gave a speech. He told Singaporeans that we need to continue working harder because Singapore is at the disadvantage where it is very competitive with the other countries in the region. So he wants all of us to work even harder, even though we work the longest hours in the world. He wants the poor to work even harder as well. But what is the concept of harder? Why does the government keep telling Singaporeans that if you get low wages, you are not working hard enough? Why do they keep telling us that if cleaners earn $800, that's because they are not working hard enough? Is that the case? No. No, it's not the case. How far else do you want the cleaner to work harder? Do you want them to take out the toilet bowl and replace it with a new toilet bowl? No. Research has shown low-income Singaporeans and low-income workers all around the world are not poor because they are lazy or because they are not smart enough. That is not the case. Research has shown that people are poor because they are paid low wages. When you are paid low wages, the only thing you think about is, how do I make ends meet tomorrow? How do I eat my dinner? How do I have enough for lunch? That is what a poor person would be thinking about. If we want to protect poor workers, we will give them high wages. Now, another research has also shown, when you pay people with high salaries, too high salaries, what will happen? Productivity will actually go down. They will become more corrupt. They will also become less willing to take care of one another because they want to keep earning their money and they want to protect their wages. So the case in Singapore is this. We have been told by the government that we need to pay them high wages, high salaries, because we need to protect them. We need to ensure that they are not corrupt. But if we have to pay them high salaries in the first place, doesn't mean they are corrupt. Now, if we have to pay them high salaries to ensure that they are not corrupt and they are hardworking, then why do they tell us that we have to pay low-wage workers low wages? Are we trying to say that cleaners, laborers do not need to be hardworking? No. Cleaners and laborers, I know, we have seen them. They work the longest hours. Cleaners and low-wage workers work the longest hours in Singapore. If this is not hardworking, what is hardworking? Now, we cannot buy into the government's propaganda, and we need to keep breaking down their propaganda. Now, the government has introduced four measures. The progressive wage model. They have also introduced a fair consideration framework. They have introduced a CPF minimum sum, and they have introduced the for the re-employment age to be extended. So I'm going to explain to you what each of them mean and how they will not protect the Singaporean workers. Now, we have been advocating for minimum wage, but the government tells us, and Lee Hsien Loong just mentioned it on the May Day rally again, that the progressive wage model is better than the minimum wage. Now, do you believe that? No. Now, the progressive wage model, how it works is, they want cleaners to earn a minimum of $1,000. If you get promoted, you will earn up to $1,700. How many cleaners will get promoted over their lifetimes? How many cleaners will be able to get more than $1,000? Now, how much do Singaporeans need to earn to survive in Singapore? Some research has shown that it is between $1,500 to $2,000, and there are 30 to 40% of Singaporeans who are earning less than $2,000. Now, is this humane? Is this morally right of a government to ensure that 40% of Singaporeans are earning less than what is required to survive in Singapore?
No!
No!
No, a research has shown that 30% of Singaporeans have to spend 105 to 151% of their incomes. They are in perpetual and chronic debts. They do not earn enough to ever retire, and they have to work until they die. There is also newspaper reports about how Singaporeans have to forgo healthcare. They choose to die instead of going for kidney dialysis, or Singaporeans who choose to work as cleaners until they die. Now, this is not humane in a first world country, in a developed country. Now, but are we living in a first world country?
No!
Now, the government says that the progressive wage model is better than the minimum sum. Now, let's see if it is. Wages in Singapore, Singaporeans earn the lowest wages among the high-income countries. We have the lowest purchasing power among the developed countries, and we have the highest income inequality, the highest poverty rate, and one of the highest income inequalities and poverty among the world. Now, Singapore is a first world country, a developed country where our GDP per capita is one of the highest in the world, but we have one of the highest poverty rate. Now, is this humane as a government to do that? And for the government to tell us that they will not define what the poverty level is because it will have a cliff effect. What is a cliff effect? Now, are they afraid that they will fall off the cliff when Singaporeans get better? Is that what they're afraid about? Now, that is a progressive wage model. It is clear that the progressive wage model is not better than the minimum wage. A minimum wage of at least $1,500, which will be increased to $2,000 at some point, should be implemented in Singapore. That is what is good for Singapore, not a progressive wage model. Now, if the government believes that a progressive wage model is better for Singapore, then I challenge them that they should implement a progressive taxation system. Now, Singapore, for the richest in Singapore, they earn the highest salaries among the developed countries, even though Singaporeans earn the lowest wages. Now, that means our ministers, our prime minister, they earn the highest wages and the highest salaries. The next higher political leader is Obama, and he earns $500,000. Singapore's prime minister earns 4 times more than Obama, than America's prime minister, which has a huge responsibility as compared to Singapore.
That's right.
Now, the highest paid people in Singapore also pay the lowest tax and CPF among the high-income countries. But for Singaporeans, we pay a higher tax and CPF as compared to them. Now, is this right when we have high-income earners who earn the highest wages but pay the lowest tax?
Not right.
Yet, is this right for Singaporeans to have the lowest wages but pay such a high tax and CPF? Now, for the medium income earner in Singapore, they can pay as high as a 40% tax and CPF. Now, this is not too different from Norway, not too different from the European countries. And we have been told that the European countries pay high taxes. But Singaporeans pay 40%. We are not too far off. In fact, we are paying as high tax and CPF as they do. So what is the government trying to tell us by telling us that tax is low in Singapore?
Bullshit.
Bullshit!
They are telling us that they want low taxes for themselves. They want to pay high wages for themselves. Now, why do I bring this up? I bring this up because there's research. Again, I have said this on Thursday and I'll repeat this. There is research which has shown that if you pay high-income workers high wages, they are going to be more corrupt and less productive. Because I want to protect my wages. And so I set up a committee. I set up a committee to decide how much I should be paid. And because I pay them high wages, they are going to pay me back high wages. And this is how it works. And the system corrupts itself as these people keep fighting for their pay upwards. Meanwhile, the only way that they can fight for their pay upwards is for all of us to earn low wages. Now, this is not right because of the PAP's motive. Income inequality and poverty is growing up in Singapore. Now, I also mentioned the Fair Consideration Framework. The Fair Consideration Framework is not fair. Now, the Fair Consideration Framework is just a website. the government has said that for employers to employ Singaporeans fairly, they need to put up a job advertisement on the Jobs Bank website for 2 weeks.
Bullshit! Bullshit!
Now, but there is no need for the employer to only put it on the website. They can put the advertisement anywhere else. They can hire foreigners without any explanation. They do not need to hire Singaporeans first. They do not need to interview Singaporeans first. They do not need to explain why they choose a foreigner over a Singaporean. So the fair consideration framework is a website, just a website. Put the advertisement for 2 weeks for show, so that Singaporeans believe that the government is doing something.
That's stupid!
Now, if the government is sincere, now what the government would do is to ensure that there are policies in place, there are rules in place to ensure that we will be protected. We will be interviewed first. If we cannot be hired, what is the reason for that? Now, more than 50% of Singaporeans, only 50%, less than 50% of Singaporeans are part of the workforce. More than 50% are a foreign workforce. A lot of Singaporeans have been chronically unemployed for more than 6 months, 2 years.
3 years!
3 years. Now, what is the government trying to say? If the government doesn't want to protect the employment of Singaporeans, then the government should have unemployment benefits. Now, when we went to Norway, we spoke to the union and we asked them, in Singapore, we are afraid of restructuring because the government tells us, if we restructure, the whole economy is going to collapse. What if we have no new industries? What if we have no new companies? Now, is this true?
No!
We spoke to the union, and the union told us, and he laughed at us. And he said, we are not scared because we have unemployment benefits. If our workers lose their jobs, they get 75% of their previous pay for 2 years. Now, of course, the next job that comes along, you'll take it. Because you are also a responsible worker and a responsible citizen. So he told us, we are not afraid that the companies collapse. Because if these companies do not restructure, they deserve to go. And better companies with better productivity and better innovation will replace these companies. Now, as I said on Thursday, Singapore is ranked 5th on the crony capitalism index. And because of this, if you are rich because you are most of us are politically affiliated to the PAP, and that is why we can get ahead. So that is what the index means. Now, if the PAP wants to ensure that their salaries go up, and they want to ensure that their people will continue to vote for their high salaries, the only way they can do that is to protect their own salaries and to protect the salaries of the people who are affiliated to them. And these people have companies. Now, if you want to protect your people, would you close your companies? Would you close their companies down? You wouldn't. And that is why Singapore is in a stagnant phase. Because the PAP is trying to protect these companies which are no longer productive, no longer innovative, which are paying low wages to Singaporeans. But they get to survive because they are politically affiliated. Now, Singapore is at the turning point, and Lee Hsien Loong mentioned this in his May Day rally. We are in a turning point because at the rate that the crony capitalism is bogging Singapore's economy down, if we do not change the system, if we do not take chronism out of our system, Singapore might collapse not because Singaporeans are not willing to work hard, but because the PAP is not willing to work hard. I would also like to touch very quickly on anti-foreigner sentiments. Now, there are a lot of anti-foreigner sentiment, and this, as all the speakers have said, is misplaced. Now, we have to understand why Singaporeans are so-called anti-foreigner. Many of us are paid low wages. Some of us have lost our jobs. Now, we know who we should point the finger at. We know that it is because we have poor policies and a lack of policies to protect our wages and our employment. That is why we lose our jobs or we get low pay. But when we have been telling the government for the past 10 years that they should do something about it, and they have closed a blind eye and 2 blind eyes at it, who do we turn our attention to? Now, it is not right that we turn our attention to the foreigners and get angry at them, but we do that because we know that we have been begging the government for the past 10 years to do something and they have not. And that is why we turn our attention to the next easiest target. About Singaporeans, as we have said, we need to refocus. We need to refocus back on who is the perpetrator. It is the PAP and it is the government, and we need to direct our focus back on the government. We need to remember that up until the 1990s, Singaporeans are fair people with a heart. We were kind people. We became more selfish because of the inequality in Singapore. And we can continue to be a kind-hearted nation if our country continues on a more equal path. And we need to ensure that we can become a more equal country. Now I'll just mention two more things. The CPF minimum sum, as I have said, was implemented in 1984. The government wanted to increase the retirement age, but Singaporeans were unhappy. So they introduced the CPF minimum sum to trap our money inside so that we are forced to work longer. So now they have enacted if you want to work longer, you can. They will give you benefits to do that. This is another way for you to work longer without actually extending the retirement age. Now this is irresponsible. Our CPF is our CPF. It has been ranked by many statistics and many surveys that we have the least adequate retirement funds almost in the world. We even have lesser retirement funds than Philippines, Malaysia, India, China. Now these are developing countries. These are middle income countries. Singapore is a rich country. Should we still be getting such low CPF? At the same time, our sovereign wealth funds, Temasek and GIC, they are ranked 8th and 9th in the world. Our CPF has been used by the PAP to invest in the GIC and Temasek to earn one of the highest sovereign wealth funds, while our retirement funds are one of the lowest. Now let me tell you just one thing. The GIC tells us that they know that our CPF is being used by them. But they tell us that they do not know how our CPF is being used by them. The other thing they tell us is the GIC's board of directors is in charge of all the investment funds inside the GIC. The PAP does not know what is going on inside because all the decisions are made inside the GIC board of directors. Now, do you know who is inside the board of directors? Inside the board of directors is the Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, is the Deputy Prime Minister Tharman and Teo Chee Hean, is the Education Minister and the Minister of Trade and Industry. Our PAP is inside the GIC and they tell us they do not know how our CPF is being used inside the GIC. Are they trying to tell us when they go into the GIC, they have to switch their brains? They take their GIC brains and they take their PAP brains out. No, this is as much as lying. The French economist Piquet has said that if you continue to pay yourself high salaries while you pay your people low salaries, that means you are stealing from their salaries. Is that what the PAP is doing to us? Now I'll end off by saying that a responsible government is a government which will take care of its people. A responsible government is a government which will ensure that our wages will be protected, our employment will be protected, that we are able to safely retire once we have done what we have for the country, that our healthcare and our education will be protected. A program in the developing countries in Mexico, for example, they have shown that if you give the poor enough money and you ensure that they are able to go to schools and to see the doctors, they are able to get better and the country as a whole will grow better. Now in Singapore, there are people who have to pay more than $10,000 to see a doctor every year. And there are people who cannot go to the universities because they cannot afford it. The government would give almost $400 million to foreign students to study in Singapore, but Singaporeans have to pay $400 million to study in the university in Singapore. Now who are we subsidizing? Are we subsidizing for ourselves? Now I'm not saying that we should be unfair. I'm not saying we should be anti-foreigner. I'm saying if you have enough money, can you look after us first? And then we'll look after everyone else. Now, once we have a more equal society and a more equal Singaporean, we will want to work together and also benefit the people who come into our country. So we need to ensure that we'll work together, that we are willing to be aware, that we are willing to tell one another and our friends what is going on in Singapore, and we are willing to make the right decision when we go to the ballot box. We must be willing to say that we are willing to come here today, we are willing to speak up, and we are willing to make the right decision to bring Singapore towards a new era of prosperity and protection for all of us.